Greetings, greenhouse people. I'm your host, Bill Calkins, and in an effort to provide this critical information in any way you choose to consume it, we are pleased to offer this discussion in video and podcast formats. My guest today is Chris Ferguson, a technical specialist with Ball Seed, who's here to share propagation protocols for Lantana as part of our Tech on Demand series covering key annuals and perennials commercially produced around the world. Lantana is one of those critical vegetative crops with a ton of retail and landscape appeal, but like many, the early stages of propagation require careful attention to avoid losses. Chris is going to help reduce risk in this process. If you like this installment, be sure to subscribe to the Tech on Demand podcast on your favorite podcast app and find dozens of Tech on Demand videos on the Ball Seed YouTube channel. But that's enough out of me. Chris, welcome to Tech on Demand. Why don't you go ahead and jump right into the presentation and help the growers optimize Lantana propagation and rooting.
Hey, thanks, Bill. Yeah, so Lantana, it's a great annual. It has plenty of color, lots of multicolored flowers depending on the variety. It has a lot of fragrance. It can be kind of fruity, kind of citrusy, or minty. It's just something that sticks with the customers. And it flowers all summer, so, who doesn't love that? So as far as Lantana production or propagation, it's pretty straightforward. It's not going to be your hardest crop to propagate, but there are some pitfalls, some things that you got to worry about, especially early in the propagation process. So when you first receive these cuttings, you want to make sure that you unbox them and you stick them immediately. Lantana is what we call a high priority crop, meaning that they're prone to wilting. They are sensitive to ethylene. So you really want to make sure that you get out in front of this, and so you can prevent some things that happen downstream. So if you're unable to stick these immediately, you would at least want to open them up, those bags, and release that ethylene gas and put them into a humidified cooler about 50 to 55 degrees and keep them in there no longer than about 24 hours. Some of the issues that may pop up when you receive these Lantana, like I said, they could be wilted, they could be dehydrated. So, pull them out, feel on those stems, see if they're soft or if they're nice and turgid. They also could come in with flower buds on them. In that case, it's not going to kill your crop. You might want to apply a Florel treatment to inhibit that flower initiation. Another thing is, look at the color of your cuttings as they come in. They could be kind of pale or they could be dark green. And this could mean that there was some sort of PGR or nutrient issue at the farm before they were sent to you. And then also you want to check for leaf abscission. They could come in and be dropping leaves, or they could have necrotic tips. That situation's a little bit more complicated. So there can be multiple reasons for tip necrosis, especially. One issue that was seen back in 2007, Dr. Kumar and Dr. Faust published a paper titled Effective Time of Harvest on Post-Harvest Leaf Abscission in Lantana. And basically what they were looking at here was they had 3 different harvest times: in the morning, around noon, and then in the afternoon. And they would harvest these cuttings. They would put them into coolers for 4 days, and then they brought them back out to analyze rate of leaf abscission and tip necrosis. What they were also looking at was the carbohydrate reserves in these Lantana stems. And what they noticed is that carbohydrate reserves in the morning were the lowest, whereas in the afternoon harvest, the carbohydrate reserves were the highest. And conversely, their leaf abscission and their tip necrosis rates were the highest in the mornings, and then there was virtually no leaf abscission or tip necrosis in the afternoons. Now, one of the treatments with this study, they applied 1-MCP, and 1-MCP is a chemical that binds to the ethylene receptors in the stems, and it prevents leaf abscission. So in that study, it was no surprise that there was no leaf abscission with the 1-MCP treated Lantana, but they did notice that tip necrosis was still happening in this treatment, and it was still inversely correlated with carbohydrate reserves. So from all that, they were able to infer that a lot of your tip necrosis that you see That's not the only reason, but could be related to the amount of carbohydrates that are in those stems, and more importantly, when they harvested those stems. So if you receive these lantana, that's just something to think about. Like I said, there's multiple reasons that could, multiple causes, and the jury's still out on all the reasons for tip necrosis. But if they're dropping leaves, that's probably because the MCP treatment wasn't done properly at the farm. And if they have the tip necrosis, that could either be that they harvest them early in the morning, they harvest them for whatever reason when the carbohydrates were low, or maybe it got there was a break in the cold chain and it warmed up, because even if you have moderate levels of carbohydrates, when the temperatures are warmer, all those biological processes are happening much faster, and that could lead to breakdown and tip necrosis. But regardless, in that situation, if you're receiving plants that look like this picture, it's not something you're going to want to stick. Another thing to think about is dibbling. If you're going to use a dibbler, honestly, I don't suggest a dibbler for this situation. Lantana they're hard enough, they're turgid enough where you should be able to direct stick them. And anything that you can direct stick instead of dibbling is much better, because dibbling, if you make the hole too large, now you're going to have space between your stem and the soil. And every hole is going to be different. It's going to have different amount of humidity in each hole, which is going to give you non-uniform callousing and non-uniform rooting. So it's very important. If you can direct stick, just go ahead and direct stick. It's most common. You'll see these cuttings stuck into either 102 or 105 cell trays, 72s. Some people will do it, but usually 102 or 105 is the norm. And as far as rooting hormone, that is optional. These will still root with or without rooting hormone. Some culture guides will suggest rooting hormone, and that suggestion is usually around 1,000 parts per million IBA. You can do powder or liquid directed at the base of that stem. And then at this stage, we want to have a soil moisture of about 4 out of 5. So we want it wet, but not completely saturated. Stage 1 is all about going from stick to a fully calloused cutting. In this stage, we want to keep air and soil temps about 70 to 74 degrees. We want to have low light intensity, about 200 to 400 micromoles. And we want to group this. If you have propagation area where you have higher and lower mist crops, this would go towards that lower mist crop, something like a heliotrope, rosemary, or helichrysum. We want to keep that soil moisture at a level 4 at this stage. No real deviation there at this stage. And then tinting is an option, but more for the northern latitudes. When you tint in southern latitudes, it's going to get really warm under those tints. So southern latitudes, probably stick with the misting, but tinting might be an option up north. And then as far as fertilizer, you want to keep it very, very light at this stage, anywhere from clear up to 50 parts per million. And then also, this is the perfect stage for preventative fungicides. Now, Lantana's pretty sturdy. It doesn't have a lot of diseases, and there's not a lot of literature out there about disease or pathogens on Lantana. But Fusarium, Pythium, Rhizoc, and Botrytis, they all do pop up. So be thinking about that when you're doing a preventative fungicide tank mix, that you're hitting all your bases. Stage 2, now we have a calloused cutting, and we're trying to get to a fully rooted cutting. So at this stage, it's all about kind of drying it down just enough to where you get those roots to start to search for water. Because if it stays at a 4 or a 5 the whole time, you're just going to get this big mega callus, and it's not going to root properly. So once you start to see root initiation, you want to cut off your night misting, and you want to reduce your misting overall. You want to eliminate your night misting, and you want to really manage that medium moisture from a 4, maybe to a 3, a little bit of deviation there. We're going to increase the light intensity up to 3 to 500 micromoles there. And then fertilizing, if you're not doing any, you can start to light fertilize up to 100 parts per million at this stage. And then, of course, the air and the soil temperatures, they're going to be about the same as they were for stage 1. Okay, so now we have a rooted cutting. Stage 3, it's all about bulking up those roots and bulking up the top growth. So in stage 1 and 2, it's been a pretty low stress environment. They've had low light intensity. They've had a lot of humidity. We're going to flip that for stage 3. Now we have the roots. We want them to get it to work for us. We're going to increase the light intensity, start to turn those fans on and increase the air movement, which will help lower the humidity in the canopy. We want to bump up the fertilizer. We're going to bump up the fertilizer to 100 to 150 parts per million. That's the highest that you're going to have during the propagation stage. And the air and soil temperature is going to go down to about 68 to 73 degrees during this stage. And then we're going to let it dry down a little bit. We've barely let it dry down in the first 2 stages. Now we can let it go all the way down to about a 2, and then water it back up to a 4, and really let those roots start to stretch and start to search for water and fill out those cells. And then stage 4, this is normally the shortest stage. It's also a stage that some growers may skip because they already have a fully rooted liner and they have all this top growth and they feel like they're ready. But if you just take the extra couple days to help tone up this liner, you'll have higher success rate when you go to transplant. And the 2 main factors for that, we're going to keep the fertilizer the same. We're going to keep the moisture the same, varying between the level 2 and the level 4. The biggest factors here is the light intensity. We're going to go to basically full sun, and we're going to drop the temperature down to 65 to 70 degrees. And those 2 factors will really help tone and harden up these crops so that you have a nice transplantable liner ready for finished production. And by the way, here in maybe a month or 2, I plan on finishing up a presentation over finishing Lantana. So be looking out for that here in a couple months.
That's great information, Chris. Really appreciate it. You ran through it in a concise way, but with plenty of tips to help folks through these first stages of propagation. Hopefully, at this point, those crops are ready to transplant and take off. And right now, you'll see that we do have tons of resources available from Tech on Demand, dozens, if not hundreds, available online. Every week, I send a newsletter covering a range of cultural and technical topics. We've created a ton of videos for growers of all skill levels, some training videos, some more advanced videos. The Tech on Demand podcast is a great way to learn about technical topics on the go. And then you can connect with about 6,000 of your peers on the Greenhouse Tech Team Facebook group. All you have to do to get into the group is search Greenhouse Tech Team, answer a couple simple questions, and I will let you right in. Once again, Chris, thank you so much for your time. And like you said, we're going to talk again soon, finish up this Lantana crop, and then work on plenty of others because there's a lot of key crops and a lot of good information to share. So thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you.